What are the penalties for breaking the cost cap? The FIA's cost cap regulation report came out this week and 3 teams have broken the rules. Williams had broken the rules for a procedural breach earlier in the season and this has been resolved with a fine. Aston Martin have also had a procedural breach and this is down to things like not submitting documentation on time. But RedBull Racing have had a minor overspend breach, which means they have gone over the cost cap limit by up to 5%. So what penalties are RedBull Racing going to face? We'll go over them in the video and we'll discuss what we think is an acceptable penalty to give to Red Bull for breaching the cost cap regulations. So the limit on the cost cap is $145 million per team per season. Now this might seem like a lot of money, but teams were spending a lot more than this in previous seasons, so this isn't actually a massive amount of money, and especially for the bigger teams they've had to scale back quite considerably. So 5% of 145 million is 7,250,000. Now you can see why other teams would be furious if another team broke this. £7 million is huge in Formula 1, and especially when teams are limited to their development, this can get you a lot of lap time around a track. Now Red Bull have come out and said they don't actually think they've gone over the limit, and they disagree with what the FIA have said. They've said it's something to do with their catering, their team became ill and they had to send out more catering which put them over the limit, but I don't see how that's going to be millions of pounds. So I'm going to quickly go over what penalties I think should be applied to Red Bull. We'll go over them in full later in this video and what penalties I think are good and bad. But I think a suitable penalty for Red Bull, if they have in fact breached the cost cap, would be a 2-time reduction in next season's cost cap to start. So say they went over by 7.25 million, you would double this to 14.5 million. So instead of their 145 million for the total season of the cost cap, they would only get 130.5 million. Now, this might sound like a lot, but there's a lot of things you have to pay for that gets you up to this figure already. So this would be a massive limitation for Red Bull next season, and it would really punish the team. As well as that, I think there should be another factor instead of just a cost factor, and I think that should be a 10% reduction in next season's Aero and CFD time for developing the car. I think they should be limited on development, as they have had the development from last season already. They've got that better car. So Red Bull have been classed as having a minor sporting penalty. Now there's 6 different penalties that fall under this, and we're going to go through them one by one. And what are the pros of this penalty and what are the cons? So the first thing is a public reprimand. Now I think this is completely useless. This doesn't hold any weight to anything, and it's basically just sort of a telling off. Next is you can lose your Constructors Championship points. You can lose your Drivers Championship points. You can be suspended for 1 or more stages of a competition excluding the race, so free practice or qualifying. They can limit your ability to conduct Aero testing or other forms of testing, and they can reduce the cost cap for the following season. So we'll go through them one at a time, starting with the public reprimand. Now the pros of this penalty is I don't think there are any. A public reprimand in F1 is basically a stern telling off from the race stewards. This isn't going to result in anything, so I think this will be handed with other penalties, but I don't even know why this is on the list. Cons of this, it's not significant enough and it won't deter other teams. So second on the list is the deduction of constructors points. Now a pro of having this penalty is you could take their championships away. Now I think this is a significant penalty and it would deter teams from breaching the cost cap. Again, as you could lose your championship, you could also lose the prize money. As you know, the higher you finish up in the constructors, the more prize money you get. So taking away points would mean you would finish lower. Now a con of the deduction of constructors points is, again, like I mentioned previously, you're changing the past. You don't want Verstappen to be winning the title and then 6 months later down the line you figure out, oh, he actually might not have won that. With any driver, you want to know they won it when they crossed the line, and that's not going to change. Another con is the Drivers' Championship is more valuable than the Constructors' Championship. Some teams may say, we don't really care about the Constructors' points, we might just take the penalty. We have the Drivers' Championship that they've won, and as a result of that, they finish low in the Constructors. I think some teams would tactically sort of take this penalty. We know that Mercedes didn't win the Drivers last year, but they won the Constructors, and they were just absolutely distraught. They didn't really care about the Constructors' Championship at all. So a deduction of drivers' points is very similar. You could lose the world titles, which is a definitely deterrent, and a pro is, teams value drivers' points way more than Constructors' Championship points. The cons with this, again, you're changing the pass, we don't want that to happen, and it's a bit silly, but teams might not have points to deduct. If the only rule is that you're going to have points deducted, if you're a team like Williams that are struggling and you get 2 or 3 points a season, you might think, screw it, we'll go over the cost cap, we're going to get deducted 100 points, we're not going to get to 100 points anyway, we'll just take that penalty if that's the only penalty they're awarding. Fourth penalty that could be given if you have a minor breach of the financial regulations of the cost cap is suspension from 1 or more stages excluding the race. So this means basically that you could be excluded from a multiple or single free practice session or qualifying, but you can't be excluded from a race weekend fully. So I think the pro is this, it won't change previous championships, so it's a penalty that's awarded to the following season, which I think needs to happen. A con is, I think will it really punish drivers? If you've got a car, let's take this season for example, Red Bull have broken the cost cap and they've got a car that is clear of any other driver or car on the grid. Will Max Verstappen missing a couple free practice sessions and even qualifying really punish him? I think most races this season, if he started from the back of the grid, he could definitely get up there and even potentially fight for the win. So I don't think this is significant, and I don't think this will deter teams from breaking the cost cap if this is the only penalty. Next is there's worse penalties for taking a new engine. So you could also get a back of the grid penalty if you crash and you need to replace your engine. Is crashing and having to replace all your engine parts the same as breaking the financial regulations? I don't think so. I think it's much more minor, and I think there should be a more significant penalty for breaking the financial regulations of the cost cap. So the fifth penalty on the list, and I think this is where they're starting to bear a bit more weight, and this is what we're likely to see, is limitations on Aero and other testing. So a pro of this is it won't directly affect the points from last season, so you're not going to see drivers losing championships, and it's a penalty for the future. The cons to this are it doesn't penalise the current season, and new Aero regulations mean you have a good base car if you break the rules. So let's say for example this season Alpine wanted to win a championship. They know they're not going to be able to compete long term, but say next season they wanted to win it. They could go all out on the cost cap, spend 50% extra and break these rules if they know that the penalty is a limitation on aero testing for the following year. They could develop a car that's so good that it wins the season and they have that world championship above everyone else. Now, is it fair that they've won that championship and nothing can take that away from them? No, I think they'll probably lose that championship if that ever happened, but I think having just a limitation on the further development isn't really enough, to be honest. And with the new Aero regulations, that first year is critical. You'd want to overspend on that year, and then you've got the car that's sort of leading for the whole of that new regulation period. So I don't think this is great. I think this should be combined with other penalties, but I do think this is good as it won't take away championships and it will penalise teams, and I think they will sort of be scared to have this come into effect because teams are always developing their cars. So the sixth and final penalty that could be given to Red Bull for breaching a minor penalty is the reduction in the following season's cost cap. So they won't directly affect the points, which I think is a pro, and it's a penalty for the future. A con of this reduction in the cost cap is it doesn't penalise the current season, so it's similar to the aero testing. teams could go all out and just sort of accept the following season's going to be a crap season, but they've already got that really good car that they've developed. So yeah, as I mentioned, the invested money in the season that they broke it will be worth it for the following seasons. So a reduction in cost cap as well, I don't think they should match it. I think it should be multiplied by 2, 2.5 or 3 times more, because otherwise you could just sort of you could take 10 mil from the 2024 season and move it to the 2023 season and just use that money earlier. So I think it needs to be multiplied as more of a deterrent. So what do you think of these rules, and what do you think should be given to Red Bull? You could obviously have the 145 million cost cap, and a minor overspend breach is up to 152.25 million. Now a lot of teams aren't going to hit this, so they won't have to worry, but the teams that are fighting up there to get close to it, what is a suitable penalty? Lewis Hamilton in Brazil last year got disqualified completely from qualifying for his rear wing being 0.2 millimeters too wide. I think when you put it into that perspective, 7.25 million is a huge amount of money for any team to develop their car, and it needs to be given a significant punishment. As this is also the first year of the rules, they need to deter teams from doing this in the future, and they can't just keep changing the rules each season. I think the penalties need to be consistent, and I think ideally they should be stated in the regulations. So what do you think is the most suitable penalty to give Red Bull? Let me know down in the comments. I'm interested to hear your opinions. I haven't really seen too much chat about this on Twitter or anything. So yeah, let me know, and thanks for watching if you've made it to the end, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.